All right, time for a California water update for February 22nd. We're going to do a few things in this video. We're going to start off by looking at the last 7 days percent of average precipitation. So how much rain did we pick up over this last week compared to how much you'd expect. Same thing for the 30-day time span, and then we're going to do it for the entire rainy season. And then we're going to start to go into some of the snow totals. How's the snowpack doing? Is it above average, below average? Have we seen some improvements there? And then what does that mean for our reservoirs? How are the reservoirs doing? And then what is the long range outlook looking like? And I purposely didn't show that map because that would give away what it would be if I showed that map. So let's just first go into the last 7 days percent of average precipitation. We're just getting out of kind of a rainy pattern right now. We had rain. Today's Thursday. We had rain pretty much from Wednesday to last Saturday. And then now I just went on a walk outside. It's beautiful out there, nice and sunny. And it looks like it'll stay that way, until the start of next week. So that's how much rain we picked up over this last week. Or at least compared to average. Anything in the purple there, look down on this bar down here. That's more than that's about 2 to 4 times as much rain as you would expect at this point in the year. Not as much, it looks like around Monterey Bay, around San Francisco to the North Bay was about 150 to 200%. Then we did have that atmospheric river kind of sit over Los Angeles, so they picked up a bunch of rainfall yesterday. Expecting when this chart gets updated tomorrow, we'll see some improvements down there in San Diego as well. But key thing I'm looking at, the one place where we were still kind of below average was up in the Sierra, and it looks like the Sierra picked up some good precipitation over the last week. Looking at the 30-day time span, this actually shows even more rainfall, especially down in that strip for Southern California where you see that kind of bright, I don't know what color you call that, pink, violet. That's where we were more than 3 times as much rain as you would expect over this last month. And I believe I remember reading or hearing that there are some cities in Southern California that are on track for the rainiest February on record. And some of those records go back more than 100 years. So that's saying something. Now, unfortunately, that has led to some flooding down there. That's kind of how California precipitation goes, though. We don't get afternoon rain every single day, which is just a little bit, and then we pick that up every day for a few months. California is kind of used to those big systems coming in. Unfortunately, that does lead to flooding. Usually they'll have some gusty winds with it too. That'll bring some trees down, lead to power outages. But that's kind of how the California climate works. And then we actually, while there are hazards to those big storms, that is where we pick up most of our rainfall. And then obviously if we didn't have those big storms, we'd be in some big trouble in terms of water supply, future wildfire danger, all that kind of stuff. So there's no good or bad when it comes to those storms that come into California. It's usually a mix of both. There's actually a scale for that. Atmospheric river 1s and 2s are mostly beneficial. Atmospheric river 4 and 5s are considered primarily hazardous. Now, that's a little bit of a tangent, so let's get back to it. This is the percent of average precipitation for the entire season. So anywhere where you see the green, that's where you're slightly above average precipitation, like 110 to 120%. And then blue is going to be 130 to 150. Purple, especially that strip down in Southern California where we've had a couple of atmospheric rivers just sit over those areas, that's about 150 to 200%. So picked up maybe 2 times as much rain as you would expect at this point in the year. And the water year starts October 1st, and then this goes until today. Bay Area looks to be in the green, so slightly above average. Central Valley's a little bit of a mix. On the western side, it's slightly above average. On the eastern side, that's where you dip slightly below average. And then that's where you get up into the Sierra as well. So I think next place we will go will be the Sierra. So this shows total monthly summit snowfall per season. And then it's a little confusing. It goes backwards in time. So it's 2014, 2015 on the right. And then our current year is 2023, 2024. So you can see what a dry year 2014-15 was. And we were on track to be on an even drier year towards the end of December. I believe the snowpack was about 25% of normal. But luckily, when you compare this year with 2014-15, If you look at the orange, they picked up 3 inches February. So orange is January. They picked up 3 inches, 2014, 2015. February, they picked up 27 inches, and then March, just 10 inches. So they ended the year extremely dry. That contributed to some of the big wildfire years we had after 2014. Now, then we had a couple snowy years. Looks like 2015, 2016, decent amount of snow. Everyone remembers last season, 2022, 2023. That's the most stretching back over this, a 10-year time span? Over 600 inches. And then this year, while we started off drier than the driest year in this record, we've kind of made up for it in January and February. So 64 inches in January, 85 inches in February, and there's still a little bit more of February to go. And some indications on the models are actually showing we're going to shift back into kind of a type of pattern that favors snowstorms, where the systems come more from the north as opposed to those atmospheric rivers that have southerly flow that brings in kind of warmer air. We may be shifting back to a snowier system, which could also be good news in terms of flooding, because usually those have a little less rainfall associated with them than the atmospheric rivers or the Pineapple Express. So a lot of uncertainty in that forecast. That's why I'm not going to talk about it too much, but just looking at it, looks like we're just below 200 inches on the season. Certainly not going to be as big of a year as last year, but I think that's to be expected. And it's also not the worst thing, because we do still have some of that leftover water from last year, which I'll show when we look at the reservoirs in just a moment. Just want to show a couple other ways. And a lot of people respond to different visuals in different ways. Some people like bar charts. Some people might like a chart like this, where it shows the Northern Sierra, Central Sierra, Southern Sierra, State Sierra. And maybe I'll focus on the state. So the red line is going to be your max year. That's 1982 to 1983. Blue line is your minimum year, 2023, 2024. Or no. The thin blue line is your minimum. That's 2014, 2015. The thick blue line is your current year, and then that shaded blue color is your average. So you can see that we started off pretty well below the average, but we've started to creep up here, especially since January. The slope of that curve gets a little bit steeper, and right now we're at 86% of normal for the state. And then for these other numbers, it's a little hard to see on this screen. Main thing I want to point out on this screen is just how far below we are from the max, but the fact that we've trended upward over the last month or two. That slope has certainly increased, and now we're pretty close to those average conditions. So a better way to see that, Northern Sierra, 99%, so right on track for where we should be at this point in the year. 82% for the Central Sierra, 80% for the Southern Sierra. In total, we're at 86%. So a huge improvement from where we were at the start of this year. By that I mean January, not as at the start of the water year, which is October. So that's some good news there. And on top of that, we always need some snow. I know skiers and snowboarders would not like if I said we don't need the snow this year. They certainly want it. Just like I want more storms to create more swell for good surfing conditions. But the main concern, aside from recreation, is water supply, agriculture. The California economy relies on water to a large extent. But we did have some leftover water last year. And then now, since a lot of our cities, when we look at the statewide summary on rainfall, a lot of the state at this point is over 100% of our average rainfall for what you would expect at this point in the year. So to sum up in a sentence, we're in a good position when it comes to water in California. Out of our top 5 reservoirs, we're above the historical averages, and we're about as high in our capacity as you would want to be at this point. You don't want it to be exactly at 100%, which is the blue number on here. So for example, Shasta's at 87% total capacity, but 125% of their historical average. So we're above average, but you might think, well, why don't, I've heard that they've been letting water out of the reservoirs. Why would they do that if we're not at the total capacity yet? It's because if there's still more storms on the horizon, you don't want to be at 100% and then have the reservoir start to overflow and then you're letting out water in the middle of a storm. There's an art and a science to water management. So top 5 reservoirs in terms of capacity. Shasta's number 1, and we're above average. Orville's number 2, 135% of average. I believe Trinity's number 3, 106% of average. Still don't know how to say this one. It's probably pronounced New Melonis, but I jokingly sometimes call it New Melons. That's at around 140% historical average. And then the 5th largest reservoir in terms of capacity is the San Luis Reservoir. That was recently at about 60%. Now it's at 84%. And I actually talked to one of the water experts in California, and I asked him about the San Luis Reservoir, and he says, you know what, on all of our reservoirs, we're kind of exactly where we want to be. We're predicting that by the end of the year, we're going to end up in a pretty good position. And a lot of this moisture that's come in, whether it's in the form of rainfall or in some of the snow that's been building up into the Sierra, that also brings more moisture into our fuels, which is going to help us out as we get into fire season. So not only looking good in terms of reservoirs and water supply, but also in future fire danger. We are, now obviously if it's a very warm spring, a very warm summer, that dries things out, and that is how California works as well. But compared to some previous years where the entire state was in drought, 0% of the state is in drought right now. And when this next wildfire season comes up, we'll be in about as good of a position as we could ask for. Now, that doesn't mean we can say, oh, we're fine, we don't need to do any fire clearing or remove any brush around your house. You do always still want to do that. Now, finally, let's look at the long range outlooks. This is 6 to 10 days forecast. Looks like much of California, especially Northern California, is expected to have above average precipitation. So, in a sentence, more rain on the way, most likely, and then 8 to 14 days out, all of California in more of a light green color, which means there's slightly an above average chance of more rainfall on the way. So overall, California water situation, I'd say, is looking pretty good, especially when we compare it to other times throughout this last decade. Plus, there's more rainfall on the way, so we'll see how much we get, and I'll continue to do these updates as more information comes in. So hopefully you enjoy the nice sunny break that we have, and you learn something throughout the course of this video. Thanks for watching.